Hello all, and thank you so much for joining us for today's virtual field trip, Stepping Back in Time, How Historic Dock Photos Can Help Fisheries Management. My name is Jacqueline Gerakis, and I'm the Expeditions Manager here at EarthEcho International. Now, EarthEcho International is a global nonprofit founded on the belief that youth have the power to change the planet. Reaching more than 2 million people in 146 countries, we provide original content, immersive experiences, and trusted resources to empower young people to become leaders and problem solvers in their community and around the world. Today, I'm so excited to introduce you to two fantastic women, Julia Byrd and Allie Iberle. They're going to tell you a little bit more about themselves and the FISHstory project. But before I do that, I just wanted to, before I toss it over to Julia, I'd like to let everybody know that you are able to submit questions today. So if you're watching here in the Zoom, you can put your questions in the Q&A feature. And if you're watching us on our YouTube channel, go ahead and put questions in the chat and we will get to them today. All right, so Julia, go ahead and take it away.
All right, guys, hold on 1 second and I'm gonna share my screen with you. All right, so Allie and I are so excited to be here with you guys today to tell you a little bit about the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council, where we work in the FISHstory project. But before getting into the presentation, we wanted just to quickly introduce ourselves. So I'm Julia Byrd. I'm the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council Citizen Science Program Manager. And so I oversee all of the council's citizen science efforts. And so what that really means is I kind of work to help connect fishermen, scientists, and other stakeholders to develop citizen science projects that help meet the council's research needs. And so Allie, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hi guys, I'm Allie Iberle and I am the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council Citizen Science Program Coordinator, and I have been tasked with kind of specifically put on the FISHstory project to help build the project, work with various partners, like Julia said, helping to engage with fishermen and making sure that we are engaging with our citizen scientists as well. All right, Julia, take it away.
Thanks, Allie. All right, so for the virtual field trip today, we're first going to give a quick overview of fishery science and management, and then we want to introduce you to kind of who the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council is. So that's where Allie and I work, so we want to tell you guys a little bit about what we do and who we are. And then we'll switch gears a little bit and talk about citizen science and the ways that the South Atlantic Council is using citizen science to help fill some of our data needs. And then I'll switch things and turn things over to Allie, who will tell you about one of our first citizen science projects, FISHstory. And by the end of the field trip, we're hoping to turn you guys into FISHstory citizen scientists. So first, we wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what a fishery is. And so when you think about a fishery, you think about kind of the relationship between the fishermen and the fish populations that they're catching. And so when you think about a fishery, you think about the fishermen themselves. So those are the folks who are catching the fish. But you're also thinking about the fish populations. And when you think about fish populations, you're also thinking about things like how fast do those fish grow? What do they eat? How soon do they reproduce? And how much do they reproduce? And then you're also thinking about the habitats where those fish live. And so when you think about fisheries management, you're thinking about how all of these things interact with one another. And so you're really trying to kind of balance any regulations you have in place so that you have healthy fish, healthy habitats, and sustainable fisheries. And by sustainable fisheries, I mean that kind of fish populations are caught at a relatively stable level where the fish are able to reproduce and kind of replenish themselves from the ones that are being caught and taken out of the water. And I think one thing that's important to note is when you want to successfully manage fisheries, you need a lot of data on fishermen, the fish populations, and the habitats. And so in the fisheries world, there are two main types of data. There are fishery independent data, And those are data that are collected on fish populations kind of independent of the fishing industry. And so these are collected by scientists or researchers and can give you information on the overall fish population. So an example of fishery independent data may be scientists going out on a research vessel and trying to catch fish to get an idea of how many fish of a certain species are in a certain area. And so fishery dependent data are data that are collected on fish that are being caught by fishermen. And so fishery dependent data can be collected by scientists who are sampling the catch that was caught by fishermen, or they can be provided by fishermen themselves through things like logbooks. And so when you're talking about fishery dependent data, it gives you a better idea of the fish that are being caught by commercial and recreational fishermen. And one thing I think that's important to note about fisheries data is it's really important to collect this data to monitor what's happening in fish populations today, but it's also really important to have historic data. So you know what was happening in the fishery 30, 40, 50 years ago, because by knowing what was going on back then, it can give you a better understanding of what's going on in our fish populations today. And so there are a lot of different people who are involved in fisheries management. And so we wanted to take a minute to kind of review some of the different people and what their main roles are. And so first wanted to talk about fishermen themselves. So these are the folks who are out there catching fish on the water. And so they're commercial fishermen who will typically sell their catch. And then there are recreational fishermen who fish for fun, but maybe keeping the catch, the fish that they catch to eat themselves. And so in our region and throughout kind of the nation and globe, there are a lot of fishermen who are not only catching fish, but they're also contributing data. And some of them are also helping within fisheries management make regulations. The next group I wanted to highlight are fisheries scientists. So these are the folks who are collecting data on fish populations, habitat, and sometimes from fishermen. And so fisheries scientists can collect both fishery independent and fishery dependent data. And the data that they collect are provided to managers to help with making regulations. And so there are lots of different ways that fishery scientists collect data. So they could be out on a research vessel, they could be within a scientific lab, they might be at a marina or a boat landing or scuba diving to collect information. So there are lots of different ways that fisheries scientists collect information that get used in fisheries management. And then the last group I wanted to talk about are fishery managers themselves. And so these are the people who are actually developing the regulations to help make sure that we have sustainable fisheries. And so this involves kind of reviewing all the data that are collected, listening to fishermen and other members of the public who provide their comments, and then developing the laws or regulations. So when you think about kind of laws that fishery managers may put in place, it could be things like putting in a size limit, so you're only able to catch fish of a certain size, or things like bag limits, so you're only able to catch a certain number of fish within a day or within a trip. And so in the United States, federal fisheries management is done through regional fishery management councils. So Allie and I work at one of these regional fishery management councils, the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council. And so these management councils were created through a law in the United States called the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act. And so that law created these 8 different regional fishery management councils across the US. And one thing that I think is really kind of cool to note about the use of these regional fishery management councils is that it really allows you to tailor regulations to your location. So what may work for a fishery in Alaska may not work for a fishery in the South Atlantic, in the Carolinas or Florida. So by having this kind of regional approach, it allows you to put regulations in place that work for the fisheries in your specific area. Now, the South Atlantic Council, where Allie and I work, we're headquartered in Charleston, South Carolina, and we're responsible for managing federal fisheries in federal waters. So federal waters go from 3 to 200 miles offshore, and we manage those federal waters from the North Carolina, Virginia line down south through the Florida Keys. And so our Fishery Management Council members are made up of fishermen and of state agency representatives and federal agency representatives from NOAA Fisheries. And one thing that I think is important to note about this council process is there are lots of opportunities for public involvement. So members of the public can provide comment when regulations are being made. We also have a number of advisory panels that members of the public or fishermen can be on and help contribute kind of information that the managers can use when making decisions. So in the South Atlantic, we manage over 70 different species under 7 fishery management plans. And it ranges from things like snapper grouper to dolphin wahoo, to mackerel, to shrimp, to spiny lobster, coral, and even sargassum seaweed. So there's a wide range of species that we measure, that we manage. And in order to manage them successfully, we have to have a lot of data. We need to have data collected on all of these different species. And so a lot of times we have limited resources, so we're not able to collect all of the data we need in order to manage these fisheries. And so I'm going to switch gears a little bit and now talk about citizen science. And so citizen science is kind of a partnership between scientists and members of the public to collect data. And so it's a relatively new field. It allows the public to be more kind of involved and invested in science, and also allows scientists to gain new perspectives. And I'm guessing many of you guys might be familiar with citizen science, or maybe citizen scientists yourself. So there are lots of different projects kind of throughout the US and across the globe where there are opportunities for members of the public to volunteer and collect scientific information. So it could range from projects where volunteers collect information on rainfall or water quality. They could be tagging fish or counting birds, or they even could be helping kind of classify photos online to help medical researchers find a cure for diseases like Alzheimer's. So there's tons of different ways for members of the public to get involved with scientific data collection. And so the South Atlantic Council first became interested in citizen science back in 2016. So if you remember a few minutes ago, we were talking about how the council manages 70 different species. And so we need a lot of data in order to manage those species. So we have a lot of data needs, and sometimes we don't have the resources to collect all the data that we'd like to manage the fisheries. And so we've consistently heard from fishermen who are in our region that they want to be more involved in helping collect the data used to manage their fisheries. And they really want to share what they're seeing on the water with the scientists and managers. And so citizen science can provide an opportunity to do just that. And so back in 2016, the council started and created their own citizen science program. And kind of the aim of the program is to work with fishermen, scientists, and managers to co-create projects that'll help us fill some of the data needs that we have. And so I'll be handing things off here to Allie in just a second, and she'll be telling you about one of our first citizen science projects, FISHstory. But before handing things off to her, we wanted to see if you guys had any questions for us.
Right, so again, if you're in the Zoom with us, you can enter your questions in the Q&A. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can use the chat feature. I have a question, Julia. I was wondering, have you participated in any citizen science projects yourself?
I actually have. I volunteer for a sea turtle group that's based out of Charleston, South Carolina on Folly Beach. And so I, in the summertime during nesting season, actually get up in the mornings and walk the beaches looking for turtle nests. And so have been doing that for, I don't know, probably eight to 10 years. I've been doing it for a long time. So it's been a really rewarding, kind of awesome program.
That's awesome. Allie, how about you?
Have you participated?
Yeah, no, you're fine. Ever since I've been on Zooniverse, I found that a lot of times when I'm working on the computer all day, it's a nice break for me to kind of hop onto another project like Penguin Watch or one of the safari projects. I like to find fish projects because that's obviously my area of interest, and try to contribute data to other projects. And it's something that's easy for me to do. It helps me kind of just reset my mind. And I know that it's contributing data to projects just like the one that I'm working on. So it's easy for me to do and fun, in my opinion.
That's awesome. Yeah. So a question we did have coming in from YouTube was, what are some other citizen science projects that people can get involved with? So it sounds like there's some on Zooniverse. I actually am a turtle volunteer myself. So in the nesting season, I like to go out and help get the data for the state of Florida on the nesting turtles that we have here. And then at EarthEcho, we also have the Water Challenge program, which is where you can monitor your fresh water and upload that to our database, which is also a really fun citizen science project. Awesome. Well, we'll come back for some more questions, but for now, let's have Allie take it away.
Yeah. All right. So as we mentioned, we're going to talk about the FISHstory project. FISHstory is the council's newest citizen science project, and it uses historic dock photos to fill fisheries data gaps. So we're having our citizen scientists collect data on what fish were caught and how often they were caught. To do this, we're using the power of the crowd through Zooniverse, which I just mentioned. We built the project on Zooniverse, and it is a crowdsourcing platform that hosts a myriad of projects where you can do anything from classify formations in space to identify African wildlife on trail cameras. And this really gives an opportunity for everybody to participate in the project, regardless of your fish knowledge. So it's really open to anybody, free and completely online. But why do we care about what was being caught in the 1940s through 70s? So in the 1970s, monitoring programs started that collected data on what people were catching, and this helps to inform fisheries science and management. However, before 1970, not really much is known about what was being caught. These photos represent a really valuable bank of information to fill that gap. And painting a clearer picture of the fisheries in the past can help us understand our current fisheries even better. So before we dive further into FISHstory, I wanted to talk about our photos. So we have around 1,300 photos, and each photo represents a single day of fishing. So the captains and mates that make up this fleet would take paying customers out for the day to their favorite fishing grounds. They would fish, and then when they returned to the dock, they would display their catch and take a picture to commemorate the day. So that's what you're seeing. We have around, like I said, 1,300 photos. Some of them are black and white, some of them are color, but they're all from Daytona Beach, Florida. They fished in different spots since there was multiple boats. So we really have a wide range of species that you're going to see in these pictures. The other thing to note is that there were no harvest restrictions during this time period. So you may see things that are prohibited to be harvested now, such as some shark species, rays, and some of the larger grouper species. So these people weren't doing anything illegal, there just wasn't any restrictions. And so where do these photos come from? Rusty Hudson is a retired commercial and recreational captain out of Daytona, and he approached scientists with these photos. All of them are from his family's fishing fleet, for hire fishing fleet. So like I mentioned, the captains would take out paying customers, and that's what qualifies as that kind of for hire fishery. Rusty started fishing when he was really young, as you can see in this photo here of him along the banks of a river. And when he was around middle school age, he was already running charters, sometimes by himself, full paying customers, making sure that everyone was having fun and catching fish. So he saw the value that these photos really represented and had, and he approached scientists to try to get a project together. Eventually, the project found a home at the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council with the help of a grant from NOAA Fisheries. So we really want to turn you guys into citizen scientists, but to do that, we need to understand a little bit about fish anatomy and morphology. So we're going to go through that really quickly, and then we're going to try our hand at identifying some fish in FISHstory photos. So fish anatomy refers to the actual structures of the fish, whereas morphology refers more to the the function of those things. So how do those structures help the fish eat, swim, and just survive in general? So we're going to start off with an easy one, and that is the mouth. So we all know what that is. It's where the fish eats and takes in water to breathe. However, in the context of FISHstory, the shape of the mouth can really help you identify what species you're looking at. So if you can see it, definitely take a look because it will help you. Next up is the operculum, and that might be kind of an unfamiliar term, but it simply refers to that hard bony covering that shields the fish's gills. Like the mouth, this can have a specific shape depending on the species. So it can be one of those tiny things that you use to differentiate between different species. Next up is the dorsal fin, and when we think of dorsal fin, we tend to think of the dorsal fin of a shark sticking out of the water. But dorsal fins are extremely important for fish because they provide stability and keep the fish upright during movement. Dorsal fins are also a great way to differentiate between different species. They can be long and run the entire length of the fish, or they can be segmented into different parts like the fish on the slide. The next one is pretty important, and that's the caudal fin, or what would normally be called the tail fin. And this is obviously moved side to side to propel the fish forward. And it is one of my favorite ways to identify fish in the FISHstory photos. If you can see it, it will really help you to determine what you're looking at, or at least eliminate fish that you know you're not looking at. Next is finlets. Finlets are small triangular fins that are located on the top and the bottom, kind of heading from the back of that dorsal fin towards the tail. These help enhance swimming speed, but not all fish have them. So if you are looking at finlets, you know you can eliminate a decent amount of species. They're pretty helpful. Next up is the anal fin, and it usually has a similar shape to the end of the dorsal fin, and the function is very similar as well. It provides stability, but from the bottom of the fish. Oftentimes in the FISHstory photos, this fin is collapsed down towards the body, but if you can see it, it can help you eliminate different species and narrow down what you're looking at. Next is the pectoral fin, and the pectoral fin acts as kind of a steering wheel for the fish when it wants to go different directions. The pectoral fin is almost always seen in the FISHstory photos, and it can vary widely in the shape. Sometimes it's large and rounded, and other times it's skinny and pointed. And the last fin I'm going to cover today is the pelvic fins. The pelvic fins are important to fish anatomy, however, less important in the FISHstory photos because oftentimes you're not going to see them. This is usually a pair of fins, and it helps the fish make those fine-tuned movements. All right, now we have on this slide the picture of the fish that we were looking at previously and a completely separate species. These fish both have the same structures like the caudal fin, dorsal, and anal fins. However, they're completely different in their shape. Use these differences to help you determine which species is which. All right, that was kind of a crash course in fish anatomy and morphology and species identification. We're going to jump into some FISHstory photos. Now, fish identification takes a lot of practice, so don't worry if this is challenging. You will always have opportunities to practice in FISHstory. All right, here is the first FISHstory photo that I'm going to have you guys analyze. So first, start off by kind of scanning the photo. What fish jump out at you? Do you think that there's a lot of similar species, a lot of different species? And the fish we're going to be identifying is this fish right here. So let's take a closer look at that one. So here's a zoomed in picture of that individual. And then we provided you with 4 options that include illustrations and descriptions of each species. And they include little tiny cobia, dolphin fish, or mahi-mahi, as you might hear it more in the restaurant scene, and then jack crevalle. So take a look at the fish in the picture and try to give your best educated guess as to what you're looking at. And if you're on Zoom, then you can participate in the Zoom poll. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and drop your comment in the comment section, and we'll see kind of how people vote and give you guys a couple
Allie, as
minutes.
people are identifying this fish underneath the arrow there, we did have a question coming in from Mrs. Young's class, and they were wondering how many individuals work behind the scenes to help collect the data and the data organization, and are they all volunteers?
So currently we have Julia, myself, and then we have a bunch of people that work in our office that help us with data analysis. We also have a design team that volunteer their time to help us kind of hone in our methods and making the protocols. But as far as our volunteers go, last I checked, and when we look at the Zooniverse platform, I can give you a more accurate number, but I think we had around 1,700 volunteers currently that have participated in FISHstory. But as far as the back side of the project goes, it's mainly Julia and I trudging along, and then some of the great partners that we work with and people in our office that have helped out. So.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
So it looks like we're just giving some people on YouTube some time to answer this question, to ID this fish. All right, so let's go ahead, and you want to give the results?
Yeah, so if you guys guessed dolphin fish or mahi, you would be correct. And so what I use to identify this fish is that really long kind of sail-like dorsal fin that runs the entire length of the fish. All of the other species here either have a two kind of segmented dorsal fin, or cobia, the dorsal fin kind of doesn't start until about halfway down the body. The other thing I looked for was that tail shape. Again, one of my favorite things to use. And it has that really long, kind of widely or narrowly forked tail. If you didn't get that right, again, don't worry. We're going to try one more photo, and then you can always practice in FISHstory. So let's look at the next photo. So here we have a color photo, which doesn't look much like a color photo that you would see nowadays. So again, scan the photo. Are you seeing any species that you didn't see in the last photo? Is anything jumping out at you? And the fish that we're going to identify in this photo is this one right here. So let's take a closer look at this fish. All right, so our options are red snapper, amberjack, king mackerel, or grouper. And again, use the illustration and the description of the fish to give your best guess.
Allie, do you have a favorite fish on this list here out of these four?
I think if of these four, if I had to guess a favorite, it would probably be king mackerel. And I say king mackerel because we're doing some length analysis with these photos as well, outside of the crowdsourcing. So we are often dealing a lot with picking out king mackerel out of the photos. So my eyes trained to look for them in the photos. And they're a really cool species.
They are really cool. And I noticed the king mackerel and the amberjack, their caudal fins or their tail fins are pretty similar. Does that give you any indication of how the fish might spend its time?
Yeah. So oftentimes that really crescent shaped tail means that the fish is having bursts of speed, or fish is swimming really fast. Again, those finlets oftentimes indicate that as well. So mackerel and tuna, they tend to hunt at really high speeds, and they have those finlets to kind of really help burst their speed. Whereas grouper tend to have fins that are more lobed, where they are able to kind of tread water and keep themselves in one spot. and wait for prey to come by, and then they just open that giant mouth and kind of anything that's close enough gets sucked right in. So the lifestyle of the fish really is indicated by their morphology and anatomy.
Excellent. That's so interesting. So it looks like our main guest for this one is amberjack. Did we get it right?
Yes, that's correct. So amberjack is a really common species that we see. They often are really, really big. Like this one, it's spanning kind of all 3 tiers on that leaderboard. They have that really nice crescent-shaped tail. On this individual, you can't see it as well, but they have that dark marking that runs kind of from the eye back along the back of the fish, and that really kind of solid, thick, torpedo-shaped body. And I know we mentioned king mackerel, and I wanted to say that the fish next to this, the larger fish right to the left of this amberjack is a king mackerel. So if you're wondering what they looked like in the photo, there's a great example of one. So great job, guys, on identifying these photos, and you are now ready to participate in FISHstory. A great place to start is our webpage. Our webpage has more information about the project, some information about captains and vessels, and then it has instructions on how to create a Zooniverse account. And this can be done as an individual or as a class. So now I'm going to kind of switch gears and show you guys the FISHstory platform. And I'm going to, oh, hold on one second. Let me switch screens here.
While you're switching screens there, it looks like Mrs. Young's class got the amberjack correct as well. So, nice. And they noticed the crescent shape in the tail, so that helped them ID it. Good job, guys.
Great job, guys. All right, so is everybody seeing the FISHstory project? All right, cool. So when you log into FISHstory, and you can get directly from our webpage to this FISHstory page, this is what you'll see. And so it kind of gives you a rundown of the project on this main page. Oh, sorry, see, I overestimated our volunteers. We're at 1,400 volunteers. I must have been looking at something else. But this is kind of a dashboard of how we are with our project, or how far we are with our project. So you can watch our progress as you go, links to all of our socials. And then if you come back up here, the About tab gives you a lot of background on the project, a little bit on the council, and then it gives you more information about the captains and vessels, which we think is really, really interesting. Some info about Rusty, but about really the people behind the fish. You know, you'll see these captains appear in photos over and over again. And if you wanted to read more information, that's available to you. And then if you're ready to dive right into classifying fish, you will hit the Classify tab. And this is where you'll be presented with a photo and an opportunity to identify the fish in the photo. Each workflow has a tutorial, which is kind of like a short instructional guide on how to complete each photo. And then if you ever have any problems or tricky identifications, we also have a field guide here. And this includes kind of basic fish structure, like what we just went through, practice photos, which are really helpful, and then just information on each species and additional photos to help you really understand what these fish are going to look like in a photo from the 1940s or through 70s. So feel free to access this anytime. And then the other thing you can do too is connect with us in the talk boards. So in the FISHstory talk boards, you can pull in different photos, ask us questions about particular fish. You can say hi as a class. So we invite you to kind of talk with us here. We're always willing to talk fish. So, so yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the the slides really quick and see if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, so we do have some questions coming in. And one of them is, what is the oldest picture you have on file?
think we have a really, really old picture of people that had caught an inshore fish that you often catch along the coast here called redfish. And it was either from the late 30s or early 40s. And I remember it's very hard to tell what you're looking at because the photo is very grainy. And there's some old cars in the background, like very old. Like if you have an appreciation for older vehicles, you'll really like these photos because you can see them in the background. But yeah, and it was really cool to see kind of an inshore fish mixed in with most of the photos show fish that you have to go miles offshore to catch. So that was interesting.
Very cool. Do you know, are there any species that you have on file that are now extinct or maybe endangered?
And Julia,
and so I don't think there are any that are extinct, but there's some species, really good big grouper species like Goliath grouper or Warsaw grouper, that within our region are prohibited from being caught nowadays because their numbers are thought to be really low. So in some of these pictures, I'm thinking of that one in particular, Allie, where there's a huge Goliath grouper that's, the size of a person, from back in the, that's a late 40s, early 50s picture, yep. Maybe. So there are none that I can think of in the pictures that are extinct, but there are some that are prohibited to be caught in our region nowadays because of their numbers.
Yeah, and sandy and or sandbar and dusky sharks are another one. I'm not really sure about their numbers because we mainly focus on fish rather than sharks, but I know they are still not able to be harvested, and you'll see those every once in a while as well.
All right. And can either of you talk about any other organizations that do what you do? Is there anyone out there that do what you guys do?
I believe NOAA does. Julia, I think you might have more knowledge on that project.
So, and I guess I'll talk a little bit from the fisheries management perspective and then talk a little bit maybe more about citizen science. So from the fishery management perspective, we work very closely with NOAA Fisheries. And so those are the folks who are actually kind of implementing the laws or the regulations that the council is recommending. And so NOAA Fisheries is a federal agency that works across the United States. As far as regional fishery management councils, we're one of 8 regional fishery management councils who's responsible for managing the fish in our area. And so there are kind of 7 other management councils across our country that kind of do what we do, but for fish in their area. As far as citizen science goes, we're the only council that has a citizen science program right now, which is pretty exciting. And I know that there's been an interest in some of the other regional fishery management councils and starting about wanting to get interested in citizen science. But NOAA Fisheries, that group that is kind of works as a federal agency across the country, has a number of different citizen science projects that they work on kind of across the country. So there's some other projects that they've had in Zooniverse before. They do a lot of kind of shark tagging or fish tagging work, all kinds of things. And there's a website that we can forward along that lists kind of all of their projects, citizen science projects.
Awesome. We had another question coming in from YouTube, and that is about the pictures themselves. So sometimes with the fish, like for example, the dolphin fish, the mahi, when they're alive or in person, they have really bright colors. So is there a reason that you don't talk about the colors of the fish on the outside? And do you see the colors in a lot in the pictures or not?
Yeah, so dolphin fish is a really interesting one as far as color goes, because even when they show up in color photos, they're a fish that is so brilliantly colored in the water. However, when you catch them and you harvest them, a lot of times by the time you get back to the dock, that color tends to fade. And that's just a trait of the species themselves. I know some other fish do that as well, but maybe not as extreme as dolphin fish. we try not to, I know in the descriptions of some of our species, we talk about the color in our training materials. However, we don't want to default to that because we want you to use the other tools available to you. Because if you're relying on color, it can be very confusing within the fishery photos. So, body pattern is something that we use a lot of times with grouper. I mentioned that kind of dark stripe on amberjack. And we talk a lot about what the color translates to in black and white. So there's often different snappers that are very similar in shape. However, one appears a darker gray in the black and white photos than the other. So trying to kind of optimize it so that the fishery volunteers are using, what's available in the photos. And unfortunately, even with that color photo that we showed, the clarity isn't there. So using those other tools is going to give you your best guess.
And another thing that's kind of interesting to note too along those lines is when folks were catching the fish, a lot of times they'd be put on ice before they got back to the dock. And sometimes that ice can cause kind of discoloration or can kind of change the pattern that you would see in the color of the fish. So like Allie said, we try to load you up with all the tools in the toolbox that you can use, not just color or pattern, but looking at shape and fin size and things like that. Because sometimes you have to, some of these photos are kind of challenging. And so you have to use kind of all the tools in the toolbox to identify the fish.
Awesome. So Miss Young's class, they're in San Diego and they're 4th and 5th graders, and they would like to know, are you tackling issues such as invasive species like the snakehead or the flying carp?
Those are good invasive species. Well, not good, but
good examples, right?
Examples, yes.
And I think the one that comes to mind the most in our area is the lionfish. I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen a picture of a lionfish, but they were brought here through kind of the aquarium trade. They look, they're pretty crazy looking. They have kind of, I wish y'all will have to look up lionfish in the picture so you can look at a picture, but a lot of people had them in aquariums and then they got released for, variety of different reasons. And now they're found on kind of throughout our region and down in the Keys and into the Gulf of Mexico too. They're an invasive species, not many things eat them. And so they are really good at surviving in our region. They can't have kind of cool temperatures, so they're more kind of more prevalent kind of in Florida, but that's a species that we are grappling with as far as an invasive species goes. I know that there's researchers that I'm aware of in Florida who have done some work trying to get a handle on how many are out there. And there's some fishermen, there have been some projects kind of collaborating with fishermen to try to catch and trap these. There we go. That's a lionfish. Thanks, Jacqueline. So they're pretty cool looking, so very cool to have in your aquarium. But they are kind of growing. Their numbers have been growing across the Southeast for a number of years. And I know there's some, I've eaten one before and it's delicious. So I know that there's some kind of fishermen who have kind of through these collaborative projects have collected them, or sometimes you'll see them on the restaurant and menus in our area as well.
I think that's a great example. And you probably can't see, but in this picture here, I'm actually spearing a lionfish as part of a citizen science project. We were kind of removing them from the area. So that's awesome. All right, well, we'll just give it a couple more seconds to see if anyone else has any other questions on FISHstory.
One other thing that I thought might be worth mentioning, and Allie is the one who's kind of spearheaded these efforts, but we have some online educator resources. So we have a field guide that can be really helpful to use if you're in the fishery project and you want to have kind of a hard copy of the field guide. You can print one out to help identify fish. And then for the teachers out there, we also have a lesson plan to kind of introduce FISHstory into your classrooms and then hopefully get people turned into fishery citizen scientists. So those resources I think are posted through kind of EarthEcho site, they're on our website, or if you can't find them, just get in touch with Jacqueline and she can get in touch with us and we can make sure that you have those.
Yes, thank you so much for mentioning those. I was just putting the links in our chat right there for everybody watching. And the lesson plan is wonderful. And then obviously the field guide is, if you're doing the project, you definitely want to have that handy. Well, thank you ladies so much for taking the time to tell us all about this project today. And we'll go ahead and you were nice enough to share all of your social information with us. So I want to show that to everybody. So go ahead and give the South Atlantic Council a follow on socials. And Julia and Allie also gave us their emails up there too. So if you have questions, you can always reach out to them. And I would like to encourage everybody to also follow along with EarthEcho and our adventures on our social networks and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This webinar, virtual field trip today, will live on our YouTube page. So you can always go back and check it out if you need to. And we just wanted to say thanks again to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Julia and Allie for sharing the FISHstory project with us. And we can't wait to see how many FISHstory citizen scientists you get out of it. So for everybody else, thank you so much for watching and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
Guys.
Bye.